It's a shame when I try to fix what's broken. It's a shame when difference goes unnoticed. And it's a shame when I try to solve the problem. It's a shame when I let the pieces fall. It's a shame when I cry myself to sleep. It's a shame when I ask for the heart of another.
Jennifer Castle is a remarkable songwriter, musician, and singer currently based in Elgin County in Ontario. Born and raised in Toronto, where she and her family lived until just recently, Castle is a bold yet enigmatic presence in music, writing honest, philosophical, and deeply personal songs, which have been released over 5 albums, initially under the moniker Castle Music, but these days under her own name. Following 2014's critically acclaimed Pink City, Jennifer has recently released the haunting, multi-layered Angels of Death, which is out via both Idée Fix and Paradise of Bachelors. She drove to Guelph's CFRU 93.3 FM recently, where she and I had a good, deep talk about her work, life, and Angels of Death. With in-kind support from Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, and Planet of Sound locations in Ottawa and Toronto, and of course, flexible monthly pledges by listeners like you at patreon.com/Creative Control, this is the 404th episode of Creative Control, featuring Jennifer Castle, with your host, me, Vish Khanna.
It's a shame when I realize summer is over. It's a shame to be under this autumn rain. It's a shame when I walk through fallen weather. It's a shame that I'm on my own again. And it's a shame that I thought this river knew my name. It's a shame that I thought I could move a mountain. Ooh, it's a shame that I thought love was a game of playing.
Hi, Vish. How are you?
I'm well, Jen. How are you?
I'm okay.
You took my role. I normally say hello first, but you actually you invited me to my own show.
That's okay. No problem.
Welcome to Guelph.
Thank you.
Now, you were trying to figure out if you'd been here before. Is anything becoming
To
more
the radio,
clear?
to the radio station itself, I don't know.
No.
But I've been to Guelph.
You've been to Guelph many times,
That's right.
as far as I know. Well, welcome to Guelph. Now, where are you coming from today?
I'm coming from Elgin County, where I live, out by London, Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long have you lived there?
I've lived there for around 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
I know you as a Toronto person.
I know myself as a Toronto person. It's a conundrum.
People are, it seems, particularly artistic people, seem to be leaving Toronto. That's what I've noticed. But I don't know if you consider yourself part of some exodus, or if you think that even that perception is overblown. Like, why? I can only ask you. Obviously, you can't speak for anyone but yourself. But why leave Toronto, the hub of the Canadian music industry?
I know, the city I was born. Well, I had a landlord that told us we had to go, and that they were going to change the rent, and their family was going to move in, and we were already lived up at Keele and Eglinton, and that was such a beautiful place. That's where my son started school.
Right.
And I became attached, and I thought, I can't keep becoming attached to Toronto neighborhoods because I keep having to leave them. They become really expensive.
Right.
And that was the last one that we could be in, really. That was the last one we could afford. So we jumped to the country.
The country. So what is your new dwelling exactly? Are you on a farm? Are you?
I live in an apartment near the beach.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That's the country, an apartment near the beach.
Well, Elgin County is really rural, but there's St. Thomas, which is kind of a bigger city, maybe the same size as like Orangeville
Right.
or something.
Okay.
There's Port Stanley, which is a village. There's lots of little tiny rural communities, Sparta, Almer, Fingal. And so there's these little villages, and then they're all linked by lots of agricultural farm presence. So I think of it as the country, but I guess I live in a village.
You live in a village. You left a major metropolis to live in a village.
Mm-hmm.
What's that been like? What's that transition been like for you to go from, the hustle, bustle, the humanity, the sheer humanity of it all to,
true.
I assume, a slower pace?
Yeah, it is a slower pace. In terms of like my pedestrianism, like I don't bump into people and I'm not out on the street. One of the things that I first moved to when I moved to where I am now via St. Thomas was like, you don't really walk around. Like people would be like, why are you walking around? Like, is your car broken? Like, poor her, People aren't out and about in the same way. That took me off guard because that's a real sense of keeping company, like being with people, but you're not necessarily with them, but you're around them all the time in the city.
Strangers even.
Strangers. And you really are a part of this thing that's bigger than you. And so maybe a little isolating to move out there. And I think I still think I am negotiating my own isolation, and what isolation is purposeful and useful and self-created, and what isolation stems from the fact that I'm, in a rural area. And also there was lots of things. Oh my gosh, it's such a big conversation.
No, I know. And I can imagine, like you say, your relationship with your own isolation is fascinating too. Often we hear of artists who are from big cities going on retreats. They head to a cabin or a cottage to pen their latest opus or whatever it is they're doing. They need to get away to find that sort of solitary mode. You just upended your life in a sense to do this. I mean, it's one thing to have your landlord situation, your housing situation be taken from you in the city, but I mean, I know other people in Toronto who've experienced similar things, and they just moved to other parts of Toronto. This is a seismic shift. You felt compelled to leave.
Well, also, I want to one day own something, and, I don't always want to feel at the mercy of another person's plans. And, part of that was also just a family decision and like raising somebody that I want to have a little bit more control over what that looks like. In terms of isolation, that's something I have no trouble finding wherever I am, even if I'm in a very big city. I've been wrestling with that trait, that sort of withdrawn nature of myself since I was a very young kid. So that's something that I can do. Usually I'm finding ways to try to integrate and keep myself really integrated in a healthy way and within my community and not withdraw. Isolation has never been something I've had to seek. I can find it even in a room with others. So it's weird. So that's something that I have to kind of make sure I don't get too much of in my life. So and that's maybe one of the reasons why the city is also really helpful, is because you're really integrated with other people just by being there. And so I kind of had to be like, geez, I sure do. Like, I can really be prone to like withdrawal, eh? Like I said aloud to no one.
So I know it's hard to tangibly pinpoint the impact of such a move on you as a person. It's been, what did you say, it was 2 years, right? Yeah. But I'm curious, does this relationship with isolation, did this move away from Toronto to a more quiet form of life, did that impact your songwriting on Angels of Death, per se?
Well, I mean, I was sort of living in a church at the time that when I was writing it, the church it was recorded in. I mean, I don't know.
You don't-
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I like I said, I can really get into my zone, so that's okay.
No matter
I
where
can
you are, you can find that place.
I mean, it's gonna happen inevitably. I can find my way to where I want to go, and that seems to happen for me. So the church, I think, played a role.
The church did.
I think the concepts that kind of follow around the church were very, sort of concepts that are close to the idea of a church anyway, were like food for thought. But, I was really in a place where I was writing Pink City before. I was really in a writerly spot then, too. And then I had, had work through Toronto Dance Theatre, and that really kept me in a really creative writing spot. And, when I was on tour with Destroyer previous to when I had moved and previous to when I'd started writing this record, I knew when I got back from that tour, I was like, I want to just get back into writing. I mean, it's something that I crave when I don't get to do, because it's like I miss that world. So I just kind of landed in the country, and whatever was around me just kind of got pushed to the side, and I immediately just went to be into a writing spot with my piano.
How do you get into that? Do you get into that zone? Does the zone come to you? I don't want to get too mystical about it, but when you say you can find that zone, it suggests you're looking for it. But I also know sometimes with muses, they kind of come to you, so to speak. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is you were in these, whether you were playing with Destroyer, whether you were working with the dance company, you were in these creative realms that were inspiring you. Yeah. And you were operating on that level. But then when you retreated from all of those things and were there, I mean, do you find that? Do you find like this stuff just comes, or do you find that you have to sit down and concentrate and
Well, I think it's really I think there's something more sort of self-satisfying and self-indulgent that happens, which is that it's based in play. And I mean, a kid can play anywhere, and I feel like I just play anywhere that I land.
I see. Okay.
And so when it's how you look at it. Yes, I find the focus. I really wrestle with the concepts. I write them out. I edit. But those aren't the words I use. If you saw me, I'm playing music. I'm just playing. It doesn't become boring. There's times where I just jump off the piano stool and I'm like, oh my God, I have to like go for a walk or something. Like, I've been like beating my head up, or just like I'm like stuck in a wheel and I'm like trying something, and you can really get caught. Melodies are so enticing, and you can really get caught in that, or you're ruminating on one thing and it's not moving. That's all just like playfulness to me.
Sure.
So I just feel like I'm playing. And in terms of muses, I'm not sure. I don't know if there's visiting that way. I might talk about them that way.
I feel like you do.
Or speak about them in trying to always describe. Maybe I feel like one of the things I tend to do is like describe why I'm going away, like, or why I want to withdraw, because I never want it to feel offensive to anyone I might be withdrawing from. So,
I see. Okay.
I might try to find like nice ways of putting it, but I'm not sure. I don't really feel like I get visited. Like I've never really like seen a ghost or anything, or like had, I'm a mystical person, but I just like the thing you do when you're being creative, when you're writing. I like working it out. I mean, it's like an itch you just scratch, and yeah, it feels very playful to me.
I want to touch upon your conjuring of ghosts and spirits, just because your record is called Angels of Death in a moment. But there was something you said that I want to home in on in the context of this record and the writing for this record. 'Cause you said a few things there that jogged my memories of the first time you were on the show. Which was in relation to the dance piece you were working on. And you are hitting everything in the studio
I'm
possible.
hitting every single thing.
It's fine. So you should have seen it when Inspector Clouseau was on the show. It just that was ridiculous. Anyway, the dance piece inspired you, as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, to explore more improvised writing, more free association, in the moment sort of writing and singing, because I think you were primarily scoring the dance pieces with kind of stream of consciousness lyrics. And then you said something, and so I want to maybe touch back upon that experience and whether it's had a lasting impact on you, because I know that was of a time and of a place. But you also said something about the church and the things to do with the church. that might have informed this record or the writing of this record. And that's kind of vague. I'm just curious what you mean. I kind of know what you mean. The church stands for certain things.
Well, I mean, when we got to the church, we literally were pulling out pews. Pulling out pews to convert it into a space you could live. I don't know. The word pew comes up on the record. I don't usually think about pews. I have to just say that it probably, everything when you're writing or when you're being creative, everything becomes fodder or materials to use. So your environment ends up playing a part, and maybe that's why you hear of writers going away or trying to change location or things like that to try to spark different ingredients. As cooking in other countries in that way, you're trying to find other spices you haven't used.
Right, of course.
So I think the ingredients in that way are around there. I think there's lots of them that kind of land within that record. And I, being the type of person that writes with stream of consciousness, will honor those, because I think that the points you drop that are real help ground maybe concepts that, are more ethereal. And so I constantly love to drop I call it my GPS. I'm like, just drop your GPS in your songs. They might not have to do with the big picture, what you're trying to get at, but they're going to help ground. So all those little bits of information I can hear them too in Angels of Death. I can hear some of those little clues as to where I was, or where I was at the time when I was writing, and I like those.
Okay,
they're like my map in some way.
A map to a time and place.
Just to a time and place, yeah. And they just ground the writing, and they honor the stream of consciousness, which, again, with the work I did with Amy Henderson in Toronto Dance Theatre, it was to write, and you just say anything, or you don't kind of judge what you're saying, and that practice was really still with me, and so I like that stream of consciousness writing. I trust.
There's a letting go involved in that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are, I don't know if you've had this experience as a writer or as an artist where you have been maybe, I don't know if you can be self-aware to know that you've been maybe heavy-handed with certain aspects of your work, and that's an experience like the one you had with Amy was a form of letting go and just trusting the moment. My understanding on this record is, you recorded with a live band. And a lot of the takes that we hear on this record, as far as I understand it, please again correct me if I'm wrong, like they're whatever the take was at the time, and there's some warts in there maybe.
Oh yeah.
Is that right?
Oh sure. There's parts where I hear that I still cringe, or I'm like, oh gosh, that could have been perfected in a studio situation. But but
that's a form of letting go.
Of course, yeah. And that was also a desire to do that, because also I think in reaction to Pink City, which was a very more carefully considered ensemble record, of which we really protected these bed tracks that existed. And even though I I improvise every time I play the guitar, once the bed track was there, we would honor these bed tracks, and people would come and kind of color them in and contribute, and it was a very considered and fine balanced experience. Whereas Angels of Death, that wasn't the reaction. That wasn't what I wanted to have. I knew, even when I was like, oh, I want to write something, I put the band together in my mind. I knew where I wanted to do it. I knew that I wanted to put myself on the spot as a singer, and I knew that I wanted to do something different than Pink City that I hadn't done before, and that I'd sort of achieved this sort of consideration with the previous record, and I wanted to blow past that with this record and do something I hadn't done. So that felt very risky to me, was to get this band, because I've never quite shared the responsibility of expressing a sentiment. I usually, I'll handle that like myself.
Right.
Like I'll express my sentiment on my own. No, I'm just being a shithead.
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah, you can say that if you like.
I was like
We are in a radio station protected by a broadcasting license, so I appreciate your hesitation. But this isn't necessarily what this, what this is for. So if you need to say a word like that one, which you notice, I'm not saying it.
I know.
I'm just trying to offer. I'm just being myself.
Being supportive.
I'm trying to be supportive. Yes.
I just wanted to like do something. That was a reaction. That was the artist reacting and being like, well, I certainly don't want to rest on a laurel here, or, I need to do something I haven't done. So that was, to me, record with a band.
But okay, so this is something that you're saying you haven't done. I think I also read, and knowing you and knowing your work, I think these kinds of free-form, liberated approaches aren't things you've never done before.
No.
In some ways, I'm
always kind of doing them.
Well,
in a way.
Haven't you approached other records of your own as yourself or Castle Music in sort of a similar way of like, I'm gonna this is what it is?
That's like kind of the that arc is stronger than whatever small arc I'm approaching.
Yeah.
It's just to feel inspired enough to make a record, or to contextualize my record, or to create my own small design challenges, of which then you achieve or don't achieve,
right.
or don't achieve, for better or for worse. But yeah, the way I approach it, probably from the get-go, the first release I ever released was a live recording.
Yeah, exactly.
So, that was my gesture from the get-go, has been like, I don't want to release something that's veiled. My first thing will just be, the medium is the message. It's that person that's standing on stage with the guitar. What is she saying? Or what mistakes happened and what mistakes didn't, and what vibrato came out that doesn't come out in the studio, or what nervousness played a part in the delivery of that song, or what. So that was like, I couldn't figure out what to release until I heard Castle Music live at the Music Gallery and played that show and said, well, I'll release that because it's fine enough and it's inclusive of the sort of person, and not, it was just, as I had to just kind of be at ease with it. It put myself on that spot, and it kind of curtailed any perfectionism that maybe I would want to.
You're kind of alluding to like varnish, like the kind of ways people glossy up whatever it is or edit something. And that strikes me as maybe you having an interesting relationship with mediation of any kind. Do you find, like, we're in a podcast realm now, as we're speaking in a radio show realm. Well, one of the things I often contemplate about this whole thing, this medium that we're currently engaged in, is that I think that it emerged out of a space where people didn't quite trust what they were hearing as being unfettered, as being true, an honest expression. It felt like everything was packaged together and cleaned up. And what I've heard from other shows, and on some level with this show, is this kind of freedom.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, so I just wonder if this approach, I guess I'm wondering where your approach to that spirit maybe comes from, if you can kind of think about that. Like, do you remember the first time you heard something or saw something and thought, that's kind of bullshit? Like, they just kind of made that into something that they thought was presentable. And I don't think that's right necessarily. I think I want the true and honest expression. I'm not asking you to think about.
No, I didn't react to things that way. Certainly when I started playing guitar and became like a songwriter or whatever, I didn't see myself in a lot of music, and I didn't publish any music for a really long time. I learned and was just like, no. It was when I kind of discovered the improvisation community in Toronto that I suddenly saw myself within that community, and then realized that what I was, the tree I was barking up was not maybe, was more improvised based, and that unlocked like a whole realm of possibilities for me, because I kept hearing shortcomings, like, for example, my sense of timing, or that I really loved these strange notes just around the notes, or there were all of these things that I couldn't fit into. I couldn't see where because I didn't, I'm not like a big crazy music like head, and I don't like listen to everything, and I wasn't listening to like every cool band. I was just like plugging away in my life, and then like literally saw a guitar in a secondhand store and was like, I think I'm gonna buy that, like on a whim, and then started writing music. And when I started recording music on my 4-track, it was nonsense. It was literally like nonsense. I kept pushing the play forward, the playfulness forward, and it kept eclipsing the song almost. Like all you'd hear was like this person that was just making all sorts of music. And it just, I never shared it with people because I was like was like, geez, can't you just play the song, Castle, like, or something? Like, why do you have to like unassemble it while you play it almost? And then when I found the improvised community, I became sort of a student of that and was like, oh, I am a student of that. That's what I'm doing.
Right.
And then I've started to go forward with confidence, and that was a really special moment, actually.
Do you mind sort of name checking some of the that improvised community?
Well, literally, I
I
walked into a Silt show.
Right.
I came back from living in Vancouver, where I had been doing home recordings for the first time in my life. As you can, it was back when Vancouver was like affordable, and like you could like.
When was that?
Well, back
in the 40s,
like
no,
on commercial, yeah.
Yeah.
No, like you could live. I lived on
True.
commercial, and it was like I had time to do this, and so I had. And space, I lived in an apartment at the time with an extra room in it.
Wow.
And, that was unheard of, that there's like this room that you could make music in. So, I came home and that night went to the Victory Cafe to see an old friend that I'd gone to high school with who was a bartender there. And the Silt were playing upstairs, and he was like, you should go check out the band upstairs. And I walked upstairs and listened to them, and halfway through, I was like, who is this? And they said, it's the Silt. And I had met Ryan Driver before I'd gone away to Vancouver. I met him in my early 20s. And I was like, oh, holy cow, that changed everything. And then from there, I became a big fan of the Silt. I became a big fan of Drumheller and the Reveries, and
so the Rat Drifting crew, Eric Chenot,
Ryan, they
Doug
all
Taylor,
really, and
yeah.
Doug Taylor was a huge. Doug Taylor and I started making music together like really soon after that,
right?
And he invited me to be him, Josh Thorpe, and Jason Benoit invited me to be the drummer in the band Everybody Gets Sick. And that was really amazing and fully improvised bass and scary for me, very scary. But at the same time, I was playing music with a group of women called Fox the Boombox, and that was kind of improvised too, and very like hyper feminine and all of these like crazy rock and roll things. So that all just kind of happened at once. But there was this really strong articulation of improvisation for me that as soon as I discovered that was a thing, I was like, I like that thing.
So what was it exactly? I think you've touched upon it pretty well there, but when you say that this altered you, or actually beyond alter, I mean, it altered you, but it gave you an entry point into music that you didn't see before.
Yeah,
Was it because of the glossy side of things seeming alien to you, like the kind of perfect kind of music? Or
well, I think that there's this real sort of push for, well, maybe at the time for me, in my early 20s, there was a strong squeezed feeling that I ought to be a really polished female singer-songwriter. And, there was lots of offers to polish up what I was doing and to bring it. And there was lots of examples of these like 1, 2, 3, 4, and strum it out, and we're a song, and this is happening. And I was just like, no, I don't certainly see myself in that. Before I saw myself in improvisation, I saw myself in blues music and sort of the constant rumination of blues music, and but that stems back to black music, and that can even be further. I remember taking a music ethnological course. Music ethnological?
Ethnographical, maybe?
Ethnographical, thank you.
Yeah.
And, kind of learning about the sentiments of the individual voice, say, for prison workers, like why it was important to sing just, why it was never this unified choral voice, but it was a voice that in its unified, all singing together and each voice being heard as these forms of like resistance, of these forms of finding individuality, and that really sticking with me, this sense to be an individual,
yeah,
and to like bring a voice, however wary, however or with resistance, and make sure that's present. And that was something that really stuck with me.
Okay.
So that was like really important to me too. Like I was very much moved by blues music.
Right.
And I don't get tired of the riffs, you know, in the same, you know.
Sure.
I don't get tired of the riffs. I don't get tired of the sentiments. You know, I'm like, you can work a sentiment over for as many years as you want.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing to do.
So you are approached, people who are seeing you play this kind of improvised music, so to speak, are saying, hey, I can fix that for you. We can fix this.
Yeah, we can fix that.
We can fix that somehow. I'm just curious because even in my description of the scene that you were outlining, I mentioned 3 dudes. Did you feel like you had more of a space as a woman in the improvised music world in Toronto than you might have?
Some of my heroes were there. Michelle McAdory had found her way through that. Alison Cameron, you know, Renee Lear and the work she was doing as a videographer and like a documenter of that scene really inspired me. And the people that have come out of that scene still continue to inspire me. Isla Craig and Victoria Chong, you know, Healing Power Records picked up a lot of the places, a lot of the sentiments that Rat Drifting, you know, if they came out of the same club, the Transac, and, you know, those players and that sentiment still is like what I gravitate towards. And a lot of the women that I play music with are from those places.
That places, okay.
Yeah, where that's okay, and that's a good thing to do.
So it's likely that it was potentially a more, when I hear improvised music, I do think of a progressive art form, and it sounds to me like what you're saying is it seemed to be in its ideology, in its openness to whoever wanted to do it. It seemed like it was a good space, like a good space for people who didn't have.
It's like people's places,
right?
It's like a good place to go and be a person, a people with all of your mess and all of you can fit into that.
This sounds like it could be a blurb for the Transac.
It's the people's bar. I think we already know that. The Transac's like, we know.
I feel like that whole contingent of people, that whole era of music in Toronto is somewhat. It's not. No, I don't want to say it's underappreciated because I think the people I don't even know what that means anymore these days. I use that term sometimes on the show. And
underappreciated?
Yeah, because I mean I know what it means, but I feel like everything's a little bit underappreciated.
And also totally has forum with the internet, so it's a weird place.
Exactly. Like I can't stress how important that the scene you're describing was to Toronto music generally. Mm-hmm. And so it's heartening to hear that you came out of that. Do you think like improvised music is not taken seriously enough though on some level? Like you got that impression from the people saying let's home in on something here and make it a song. Yeah. Why do people mistrust? Because we've been talking about improvisation.
It's commodification, I think.
Yeah, they don't know how to sell it. I think
it's just genuinely like, let's commodify this. And that is seen as a compliment, but I've always been shied away from that, and I've always questioned those sorts of things, however, whether I'm just feeling those questions or articulating those questions. And I think that people really do want you to find a genre and want to commodify you, and that ought to be seen as a compliment.
Right.
But I don't find that much of a compliment, and also have never wanted to really do that. Although I certainly am finding comfort in shining up my own songs as I go.
You're making records that are they are vaguely more. They are comparably more conventional.
Oh, definitely.
But they're still you. And yeah.
But as I become more equipped with the tools to express myself in those situations, I am an artisan. Hopefully I'm getting better at what I do as I go. Yeah. Like that's what we want from our artisans. That's, I certainly am not going to buy a table from a carpenter that's getting worse.
No.
You just want them to get,
It's an interesting comparison to make because I do think in the long arc of a musician's career, as you know, probably following whomever you follow, a long career has peaks and valleys and missteps and certainly some of the artists that we both love who've made 20, 30 records, there's always some kind of like thing where you're like,
phase.
That didn't really work out as well as the other stuff and somehow they come out of that or whatever. Like I'm reevaluating that too because maybe that's all just, I wasn't in my case anyway, these records that are made, by artists who can make 30, 40 records. I wasn't around for the time that those records were made. I don't know. I wasn't a witness to it.
Right.
So I don't know what was going on in the world, right? Whereas someone like Dylan, for example, like I have been around and I got certain records when they came out.
Right.
And those records have a way more profound effect on me probably than his supposed greatest records, right? Like, I mean, anyway, that's a whole other thing.
No, but I think that a lot of artists make records for themselves. And so they make, like, I know that I do. I make the record for myself first. I write the song for myself first.
That's a valid,
and so, but if you're of the same time when that person maybe made the record for themselves, and maybe if that person's, using tools to drop their own personal experience into those songs, then you might relate to that. You suddenly have a shared context even without even knowing it.
Exactly.
And that goes a long way for sharing. That's just another element of sharing at that point. And sharing is caring, man.
No, it's true.
Cut it. Drop it on that.
My understanding is that Angels of Death was actually spurred on by a tragedy, right? Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, tragedy is a big word, and there was, a few sad things that happened, and one of them that I've talked about with this record was that our family dog was killed, but I also, in the exact same breath, recognized the size of the tragedy was one of which I was able to have complete capacities while I, went through.
Yeah.
So there's tragedies I've been through, and there's tragedies I've witnessed other people's to go through, where sometimes you don't have your full capacities to be a writer in those moments, and nor should you. There's all-encompassing moments, and this wasn't an all-encompassing moment. So I had my wits about me and was also wanted to be writing, and things sort of took shape shortly after that. And I was able to crystallize a sentiment which I was thinking, which also I think had a lot to do with turning 40. Mm-hmm. And that
Me too.
was that,
I think you and I are the same age.
Yeah. Are you? You're of the dragon?
1976? Oh, no, I'm 77.
Oh.
I'll be 41 soon.
Geez.
I'm getting old.
Keep going.
I didn't realize that. Aren't we the same? Are you? Wait.
No, I'm 76.
You're 76. I'm 77. Okay, I'm not the year. I don't know. What am I the year of?
I don't know.
You're like Bruce Lee, and I don't even know who I am.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Why would you care about other years?
I'm the dragon.
That's exactly
only
right.
care
Okay,
about
I'm
myself.
sorry. I didn't realize that. Okay.
I'm a dragon. It's hard. I'm burning this microphone. Vish's just like, get out.
It's hot in here. So you turned 40, and
well, I think that too young to die was no longer maybe as, there's this youth thing that it's like, oh gosh, no, they were taken too soon. I felt like, okay, me and a lot of the people I know are getting older, and we're starting to go past the point where anything's a given, like that are, all of our, lives are just these givens now. And we're going into this other phase where I think there might be some goodbyes in the horizon, and I want to go long. The sentiment is of an endurance runner who wants to go long. I've said since I had my son, I'd love to live to be 100. There's something so exciting to me. My grandmothers both lived well into their 90s, and it's inspiring, and I really do want to go long. But I knew that in understanding that there would be, I was putting myself in a position of which I'd have to witness that not everybody gets to go long. And so I just wanted to say that at the brink of that moment was that I was going to try to make peace. And that was why I called it Tomorrow's Morning. I'm going to try to make peace with what the next phase may be about.
It's a very astute observation. It's a very reasoned observation to make. It's kind of stuff that I'm dealing with myself now. Like, it's a weird thing. You and I both have young kids, and we had them, I guess, when we were in our 30s. We were in our 30s, right?
I was 31.
Yeah, exactly. So we had our kids, and then they're coming up, and you've got your hands full with that. And then I don't know about your situation, but like my own parents are starting to get older and experience health issues, and there's a decline imminent, as you say. And it's stuff that you don't think about generally.
No.
But until you're forced to.
Well, I think that's part of being youth, is that you don't need to think about that, and nor do I think you should. I certainly wasn't walking around thinking about that in my 20s and 30s. I was more omnipotent than that, and that's what youth is for. And I don't, I'm not trying to dampen, that.
That's
but
just
I'm
it,
recognizing maybe that I'm not in that particular role anymore, and that you start to think about it when it starts to get up in your face.
I know, and that's, but it's also, I will say, the truest signal I've had that I'm old.
Well, sometimes the truest signal is your young child, and you go, and your older parent, where you go, wait, I know what this means.
I don't know if you've had this experience. My kids don't necessarily make me feel old. I keep saying older. We're 40. So we're older. My kids don't make me feel old. I think it's that my parents make me feel older, like seeing them go through things, and that's where I'm at with it. And so when tomorrow's morning, which for those who can't see it or have not heard the song, is morning to mourn, not tomorrow morning, but to mourn, and it's a hard.
I just wanted to make peace with it. I'm not cultivating it. I'm not inviting it in.
You call your record "Angels of Death" too. That's why there's a death thing going on.
Well, death, there certainly is. And
or mortality, anyway.
Mortality. And also, look, it's a little bit taboo. And
that's the other thing. Like my family, the reason taboo. I'm struggling with it personally is that we never.
It's Voldemort.
No one would talk about it.
He will not be spoken.
My parents would not talk about death or illness. No. It just repressed it, and we would not if it just wouldn't happen.
No, and here's the thing. Me too in many ways. Or I see that socially in many ways. And that was also just wanting to crack that open a second for myself, even to just have that space to think about it. But also, I listen to the Grateful Dead, and I'm not like bogged down by like the Grateful Dead. I'm not like they're like bringing it, they're bringing death every time I say Grateful Death.
I see.
Grateful Dead. I'm a very Grateful Dead are a rock and roll band, and I play rock and roll music, and I think that for the press cycle this will be really honed in on his death, but I do think this is a collection of songs and a collection of rock songs. So Grateful Dead, is inspiration. I do yoga, and I'll go to do yoga. I do it actually mostly in my house. I don't really go to studios, but you do corpse pose at the end.
Yeah.
So corpse pose is where all the magic happens, they say.
Right.
And that's where you release and you practice to just let go of everything. So I feel very safe in corpse pose. It's not morbid to me.
Right.
It's not a morbid experience, but it's a peaceful experience. I can play around with these ideas of like the tarot and the death card. The death card does not signify death. It signifies death to design, or giving up control, or change of plans. It's giving up what your design, the concept of your own design is, and it's confronting that and saying you don't actually have this control. And so these cards or these things can, they were kind of inspiring for me. And like the Angels of Death is like, for me, it was a very safe concept, because it's what happens after you've had that experience of loss. It's how life goes on, and it's how
I see.
It's how flowers bloom for you in that moment. It's how you notice beautiful things. You have to be here to see them. It's something we do as living people, is experience the bittersweet silver lining of loss. So it's in that way a record for my people, and my people that are here. Where you go after, I don't know. I don't need to write that record. I can't put my mind to it that much. I'm not an opinionated person. I have no idea what's going on after. That's not what I was getting at. I'm not writing it for people that aren't here. I wrote it for us that are here, for myself that is here, and those merciful. I always thought the Angels of Death and the Sisters of Mercy would do good at a bonfire. You know what I mean? There are blessings, and they're all around us, and going forward into a situation of which I might have to encounter loss, it was a way to make sure I'm bringing with me and counting my blessings as I go, and that will be the way that I think that I'm going to survive these years that aren't guaranteed.
I feel like we're returning to this concept of letting go of things, because one of the things that I've had to deal with in terms of finally, now that life is happening and unfolding the way it is, I'm finally trying to deal with death as a concept. And what someone said to me recently that sort of helped, because you said, I'm a long distance runner here. I want to live till I'm 100.
Because there's I have specific reasons for that.
Well, I'll let you expand upon that in a moment. But I do think that one of the things that was said to me that is, I think we take for granted sometimes or don't think about, is that everybody dies. And on some level, that's just something we put out of our minds. Some of us. It's the way we were raised, maybe. I think you kind of... Sometimes you read the news and you hear of some horrific thing and you think, well, that just happened to them. To that person or to that group of people. And
I do feel like it's a very patriarchic notion. And
which one?
The death as the taboo. I feel like I feel like if we lived in the matriarchy, then the women would say that we who give life give death, and we will not let it be dark because we give life, and that we are not going to let it be taboo because it's one of the gifts that we give when we give life. Right. And that, creation and Mother Nature is, completely... she does what she says, she does what she does, and you have to trust in that. And I do feel like the patriarchy has allowed these sort of taboos to exist in things that are, there can be light. I don't want to go through any of it, and I have to knock on a lot of wood.
Yeah, knock on all the wood.
This, record. I'm always like, oh, that's not but that's me trying to, this was also a punch in the face to that patriarchal notion where I was like, I shan't go forward in my life as a woman and have this scary, how can you make dark and fearful what we do and give.
But that's what the patriarchy does generally. They fearmonger.
Yeah, it's fearmongering. And I was like, you're not going to do this to my it was, that was my one, when you're with creation, when you're writing and you feel powerful enough, you take things on. You go, what about the one that you never get away from? Bring him to me. Bring him to me. I'm in my creative, omniscient goddess, realm where we are all, we are all one, and it's all one, and it's of the cycle. And I shall trust in the cycle when I write this record. And, so F that. Mm-hmm. F that.
Okay. Well, I do. I mean, we've talked about it conceptually on some level, but I do want to hit back at the band aspect and the musical aspect. By the way, and this might be totally out of nowhere, we were talking about the patriarchy. John Lennon. Do you like John Lennon's solo records in the 70s at all?
Yeah.
Do they mean something to you?
Yeah, I love John Lennon's writing. I love his bridges. Yeah. I love Lennon's writing, I do. There's
a few, I know this might be kind of rudimentary reference point, John Lennon of all people, this, but I do think his solo records aren't really given the scrutiny sometimes that they deserve, and I've noticed a few records coming out of, let's say, Toronto, where I'm like, oh, there's something about the spirit of George Harrison, John Lennon, post-Beatles is coming through on records, and I thought of Angels of Death as one of them. Is it a muse? Are those an influence?
I said to Matt Dunn, play it like Lennon would play it. Play the drums.
Really?
Don't stray. It's the simple...
That's a reference point you actually used.
Oh, I said play it like Lennon would play it.
Because even the way it's mixed, even the way the reverb on the,
Well, we were also wrestling with the live setting, and he did a lot of that too.
Right.
So I think that, your choices are a little bit, you have less choices because, and maybe that you recognize that from, because McMurray probably had to do some similar
Jeff McMurray,
tricks, right?
Engineer, producer, yeah. Yeah, so there's just something when I think about what that liberated period for Lennon was after leaving the Beatles and feeling like he could say whatever he wanted and confront whatever was bothering him or or that he was afraid of. I hear that on this record a little bit. I hear that same, it's not a departure for you, but it's that same kind of entry point into something where you feel free.
Yeah.
And you're with a band that's supporting that that spirit. So that's all. I don't mean to...
Oh, no. And George Harrison was also,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, not a literal muse, but, you know, life in the material world. And, you know, you're wrestling, you know, it's philosophical. And rock and roll's freedom. Like, hey, you don't get many perks, right? Like, there's
Right.
not a coin to throw. So, but you got to have, if you're in rock and roll and you're in it for the long term, if you give up your sense of freedom, you're dumb.
Yeah.
You know, like, get more free. Like, if you're not getting more free,
Yeah.
then, you know, I don't know, like, go home? I don't know, what do you, like, what's the macho thing? Get more free or go home immediately.
Yeah, that's a good expression to have. Yeah, there's just something about the sound of the record that takes me back to that sense of freedom, and even those sounds. Like, there was just something about that sound in the early 70s. I guess we know what he was like now, but that kind of Phil Spector-y thing was going. I don't know. You did this in a church. I'm getting this reverberation from this record that.
Well, the church, that sound is there too, and that was part of wanting to take it out of the studio. And, you know, I was writing in this church and saying, I want to record in here. This sound is made for what we're doing. And it was messy when I got, like, through the band together and asked Jeff to come and leave, you know, his beautiful studio and get an assistant, and the band and I had 2 or 3 rehearsals where I was like, this is what I'm hearing, and please hunker down on these songs.
Yep.
Like, nobody's having too much fun, you know, metaphorically to say, in terms of like melodic, like getting off melodically. Like, we're hunkering down. My hunch was that if we kept tight together, that something would come out of that, really, you know, that there'd be something bigger than the sum of its parts. And we had to trust that.
Right.
And the first night we got to the church on Friday and tried to set up and play a song, Jeff and Simon Larchette from London, Ontario, who assisted, immediately were like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like, this is, like, we've bitten off. Like, they were like, hold on while we figure this out.
Sound.
And it was like Robbie in the hallway, you know, Johnny on the piano in the hallway, like, trying to see each other basically through mirrors, and all of us, you know, in our little zones in this church. And by Saturday, I think when Jeff heard the songs we were going to try to play, and he was like, we want to try to get this right. So we renegotiated, and by Saturday morning we were set up and we just started to play. And by Saturday night, I have fond memories of it, of like really rocking that little church, man. We really found our zone, and it was really fun, and it was fun. It was like fun. And, you know, songs can be heavy, but they're songs, so they're also fun.
Did Jeff or the band alter your idea of these songs throughout this process? Like, did songs change from what you had envisioned them to be?
Well, Tomorrow's Morning I wrote as a jangly, and still perform often when I'm alone, as like a more jangly guitar song with a harmonica. And Jeff was like, you know, I think that Johnny should play piano, and you should try to see if you're, like, not veiling the meaning a little bit.
Oh, I see.
And, you know, like, let it land a bit. Like, you know, sometimes the guitarist in me distracts from ever, like, I'm like, look, I'm not saying anything. I'm playing guitar. Like, it's like nothing's happening here but notes. And then he was like, stop with the notes and let it, you know, land. So that changed. That was Jeff's suggestion. And, and in terms of the band, you know, we rehearsed a few times, and then we had to give it up, because then we got to the church and nothing of what we rehearsed made any sense, because of course we had this new player, which was the room itself. So there was an anxiety from the band, or a few members of the band, about like, oh no, what do we do? And I don't get anxiety in that situation, because I'm like, what was the point of rehearsing anyway?
Sure.
I don't even usually. I usually, half the takes on the Pink City were the ones where I was like, we know you haven't heard it. We're just going to play it. And you just follow along. Like Ryan Driver's piano. It's him hearing it as he goes. So, you know, but this one I was like, just give up. Remember the gesture. Remember what we're throwing out there, and follow and make space for the lyrics. You know, hunker down around the words, because they have to survive this, and they're not going to get their little cushion. And we ripped it as well as we could.
I mean, the record sounds amazing, and it's been interesting to hear the backstory. It's been out a little while now, this album, and I know it's received many accolades. As we're speaking, you're nominated for you're on the long list, I believe, for the
That's right.
Polaris Music Prize. So, and it was received well critically. Is there anything you have read or heard about the record that you wish to dispel? Is there anything where you're like, man, people, you mentioned like, now death is kind of following me around because of how it's been framed on some level, but is there anything for people who are about to maybe hear the record now for the first time? I know you don't want to lead people into what their moments are going to be, but is there anything where you're like, I kind of wish people would stop talking about this or
No, I've more that it's been kind. People have been very kind, and I didn't realize one thing. I didn't realize that's really interesting is that we all have death in common. I had never thought of that, so I was like, oh right, everybody that's listening to it is having their own reaction to it from in their own world contexts, and
it could be fresh, it could be from the past,
it could be next week, and then they'll be like, whoa, that's weird, your like record was in my house, and I'm like, okay, that's weird, but again, I'm just gonna, I've already slayed those things. Like, you protect yourself when you're a writer anyway. You get really used to people projecting stuff onto you, and and that I have experience in that now. I'm not new at that.
That's true.
So I have like a really big shield that I put on, and I had a very adverse reaction to releasing this record. A week before this record was supposed to come out, I literally shut down. I was like, I don't want to put this record out. Like, I was foot dragging, and I think I intuitively sensed that it was going to be hard to remain impersonal. It was going to be a very personal release for me. And I haven't had that. I've never really had to do that. I tend to be a little bit more shielded. And I think I knew and had a very adverse reaction. Every step of the way, I was like, no, like I wouldn't be able to sleep. I was like, it's going to be so scary.
I hesitate to bring this up because I don't know, I don't know if you, well, let's see where this goes and tell me if this is out of turn. But you texted me before the record was coming out, we were going to talk.
Right.
And you texted me and I will tell you, like, I think I responded calmly, but I thought your text seemed freaked out you were like, I don't know about talking. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, you were just, and I was like, Jen, we've talked before, we're friendly. Like, I don't know what's going on. And I thought that was fascinating because when you say what you're saying now, I just immediately was drawn back to that moment of uncertainty.
And I circled back because I knew I was doing it. I circled back and was like, Vish, whoa. Like, I circled back and was like, dude, I'm freaking about this. Yeah. And hey, like, I'm not going to, this is nobody's trip but mine. And I just have to kind of suss it and also have compassion for myself as the writer in this moment. And like, was on the brink of press and was freaked out because I didn't know how to shield myself. It would feel disingenuous to not be open to this because maybe I didn't realize I was going to be starting a conversation around this, but I did. Yeah. And, I have to kind of like walk that. But the bigger and more wonderful story is that lots of people rallied around me and saw my vulnerability, and it has been a very rewarding, very touching, and very sweet reaction that I've had from my close friends that have seen me release before and been like, we know this one was hard for you. And also that encouraged me as a writer to lay bare and to keep going towards that vulnerability and and to see, and also to be wise enough to see it when I'm like almost lashing out and going, no. Yeah. And then going, yes, okay, I'm sorry. That's mine.
I understand where you're coming from. And I mean, on some level it's a strange thing to make a thing that's personal and then just put it out there and then people tell you what they think of it or tell you change them in some, I mean, it's an odd thing that you do.
Yeah, it's an odd thing. And I fight that and I immerse myself in my community in other ways almost because there's part of me that could wonder whether I'm being self-indulgent or, that could shame myself for sharing. And, so I structurally make sure I'm involved in my community in ways where I don't, lose sleep over it. I'm like, I am being helpful. I'm a good person. I'm rewarding member of community, you know, and like, because you can turn the sword on yourself sometimes. And that's where we need to really protect our sensitive people, and we need to check in on them and say, hey, are you carrying like more than you need to carry about this? And like, you know, are you suffering with being this open a little bit? And then just check in. And it's like taking that little temperature moments where I'm like, oh, I'm lashing out, or I'm like having adverse reaction. And then just kind of saying, that's okay. Like, keep going. You know.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
I'm glad this is all working out the way it is.
Well, I also listened to your interview with Chanot and just laughed.
The Eric Chanot interview.
Laughed and was like, it's fun.
Was it funny? I don't remember that being
the breezes. Like,
the breezes.
Know, when we got into that. And then, of course, I love to hear Eric, you know, chat. And he's so sweet.
Such a major force in my life, and I know in for many people in Toronto. Indeed. And he's missed, and I said that to him, I believe, on that episode. And he's funny. He and Ryan Driver are really funny. As a collaborative unit, they're just funny. And just hearing how he even worked with him, how Eric worked with Ryan on the lyrics. And anyway, it was good. So what's next for you, per se? I know as we're speaking, it's around the end of June.
I know. This record has been out for around a month, and which means it's very old now.
Like us. It's old like us now.
It's old now.
Yeah.
It's, you know.
Time for it to get some perspective on life. Yeah.
I will, I have this summer where I'm not really touring. I have a few shows this summer, rock and roll shows, which is fun. So I get to play music. I played music all through May, which was really fun. And then I tour in the fall, so I'm kind of gearing up for that. That takes a lot of energy from me because I always leave somebody who really, really misses me when I go.
That's right.
And it's very challenging to be a mother in that moment on the road. And I think that is getting to be a bit more of a nice conversation now about like, what's it like for moms out there? But it's been, you know, hard and very challenging and continues to be. Right. So I'm bracing myself for the fall, but I also have accepted that this is what I have to do. Yeah. And this is part of being a singer, and you have to go find stages to sing on. And so off I'll go. And then, you know, I have music that I'm working on. I hope to find I hope to find a piano and sit with a piano again and play music. That all sounds be a musician.
That all sounds good.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound bad. Where can people learn more about Angels of Death and you generally these days, Jen? Hey, you're on a new label.
I'm on a new label. I'm
in the
Paradise
States.
of Bachelors. Yep, in the States. So they're a good place. They've
Paradise of Bachelors.
Really cushioned. They've been a nice cushion for me. The Brendan and Chris from that label are very supportive, and Brendan in particular did a lot of writing around the record and put his mind to the record and his interpretation to it, and that felt like something that hadn't been done for what I do before, and so I feel really glad to be with them. And so that's a great place to go, Paradise, Ide Feeks. I have a webpage. Oh my gosh, I think it's JNFR. I have to look up what the address would be, so I'm not going to advertise. Okay. Maybe there's no vowels. And I don't know. I mean, you can find me. If you're looking for me, you can find me.
Jennifer Castle is actually quite a Googleable thing to...
I'm out there, you know.
You're out there.
People are like, are you on the internet? And I'm like, I am.
Some people would think you're too... you're a little mysterious to some people. You're a little enigmatic.
I mean...
At the same time, I don't think that about... I don't think you are.
People always say that when they see me, and then they realize I'm like this bumbling kind of like friendly...
Yeah, you're forthright.
...person.
Yeah.
But that in my life, I think people literally picture me behind my own hair, like dangling by a window somewhere. But you know...
They just got to know you a little bit.
Yeah, when I'm not writing, I'm just like... Hey, what's up, guys?
Well, hopefully something like this, because I know you've done a lot of print press, and you've probably done some appearances and videos and whatever. But I hope that this experience might dispel some of that.
My nerves around sharing, I think it has, or my mystery, my assumed mystery. Yeah, people will just hear me for what I am.
Yeah, this is what you're like.
I'm just thinking out loud constantly.
We all are, but you in particular, maybe.
In particular.
Is there a song from Angels of Death, that we can go out on? Something you can pick?
Something I can pick. Angels of Death is a nice one.
The title track for the album?
The title track.
Is there a particular reason you chose that one?
Well, maybe on the heels of this conversation, that maybe it would explain why I'd call the record Angels to Death, because in that song, I think a really lovely, peaceful sentiment with the aid of Alperti's poetry.
Yeah.
I think that, and his poem, his stanza is, these are life's gifts in the loopholes and catacombs of time, to travel and glance back and see far distant replicas of ourselves, perched on a mirage, waving to us, as if surprised to see us still alive, as the seed imagines the flower. And that unlocked the optimism inherent in this record, and it also it fell into a song called Angels of Death. So the paradox is there for you. And it's a song called Angels of Death, reflects a record called Angels of Death, yet has the most beautiful and peaceful sentiment of like a seed imagines a flower. And is there anything more beautiful than the idea of a tiny seed courageous enough to break its little skin and grow out a flower? It's so sweet.
I can't think of anything offhand.
It's so lovely.
That sounds about right. All right, This is the title track from the wonderful new album by Jennifer Castle. The song is Angels of Death. Jen, thank you so much for being back on the show, for coming to Guelph. I wish you the best of luck with everything going forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Vish. Thanks for having me.
You're my only friend when I'm lost for war, and when the angels of death are hanging in a row. You're my only friend.
That was Jennifer Castle returning for the 404th episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available on all iOS and Android platforms and also on things like Spotify, YouTube, and Audio Boom as well. If you can't find an episode that you're looking for, or if you wish to learn more about me, or sign up for my regularly scheduled newsletter, please visit vishkhanna.com. You can like Creative Control on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at vishcreative, or follow me at vishkhanna. Also, you can listen to a radio show version of Creative Control on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time, around the world at CFRU.ca, or on an actual radio, 93.3 FM if you're in or near Guelph. That's where Jen and I met to record this episode, so there you have it. Please also consider visiting patreon.com/Creative Control to make a flexible monthly donation. And if you like, for your trouble, for your donation, for your generosity, I can send you something like a t-shirt, maybe? A t-shirt or something else. Let's work it out. Once you make your Patreon pledge, send me a note. I'll figure out something I can do for you in return for your gift, other than making the show, which I think is why you sent me the gift in the first place, but I'd like to do more. So please, send me a note and we'll work something out. Thanks again to all the in-kind support the show gets from people like Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, Planet Bean Coffee, Grandad's Donuts, and Planet of Sound. I'd like to thank my dear old pal Jim Guthrie for letting me use the instrumental version of The Rest Is Yet to Come, one of his songs, to end this show each and every week. Go to jimguthrie.org for more info about him. Thanks to you for listening to the show and telling your friends about it and rating it and reviewing it positively and downloading episodes and subscribing. Please subscribe to the show so you know what's going on. That's all great. So thank you for that. Thanks again to Jennifer Castle for coming back on this show and having a nice chat with me. And that's it. I've got more things to come. There's more episodes and stuff to do. It's all I'm doing. So it's not all I'm doing. It's among the things I'm doing. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye for now.